Good morning, everyone. It is the 30th of April. It's Wednesday. Today I was going to talk about oscillators. It's going to be a pretty basic talk, basic stream. There was a lot of point in this. The idea that we start talking about some basics again, getting back to basics. The one thing I wanted to talk about today is voltage-controlled oscillators. And if you want to follow along, you could go to the Wikipedia page that talks about voltage-controlled oscillators, because that's what I downloaded as some notes. The idea that these were my notes because, you know, I know what resources people look up on the internet. I know what people are reading and what they're trying to figure out. So the idea that I had some of this to talk about while I had an oscilloscope in front of us as well. Okay, and in doing this, I got a little bit of reverb on the patch on my voice and on this sound. And we're just going to get down into what an oscillator really is. So the first oscillator that I'm going to choose to show everybody today is a digital classic in our time, meaning in the last, I don't know how many years. The module is called Braids. I have a DAO version of it, which is Grayscale's For You Buchla version, but I own the original Braids, and I'll tell you they are quite identical. That's why I like it. And in this, we're going to talk about what an oscillator does. Now, an oscillator is something that just makes a sound at the core, and a voltage-controlled oscillator, according to Wikipedia, is an electric oscillator whose oscillation frequency is controlled by voltage input. So what are we talking about? So I'm going to start us off. I'm going to reset everything. I had an intro patch because I just wanted to hear it bubbling and making that classic Buchla bongo sound. So I wanted that. That was on purpose, right? And now what we're going to look at is the idea that we could learn. Oops, that was bad. Sorry. Okay, so here we are. We're talking about voltage-controlled oscillators. We're going to use the Buchla as our main source. And as you can see, I have an oscilloscope up in the top corner. This is a Rigel. If you want to look up the model, it is a DS1102E. We're going to use that as our companion. And like I said, if you want to follow along on Wikipedia, I've downloaded the PDF of the full page of Wikipedia in voltage-controlled oscillators. Its first definition is a voltage-controlled oscillator is an electronic oscillator whose oscillation frequency is controlled by a voltage input. The applied input voltage determines the instantaneous oscillation frequency. Consequently, a VCO can be used for frequency modulation FM or phase modulation PM by applying a modulation signal to a control input. A VCO is also an integral part of a phase lock loop. VCOs are used in synthesizers to generate a waveform whose pitch can be adjusted by a volume determined by a musical keyboard or other input. All right, I'm going to stop after that first paragraph because that was a mouthful. And we're going to cover some of that, right? The most classic analog oscillators have a couple really basic shapes, right? And what I have here for us, I'm going to adjust the amplitude, right? And now on Braids, we have one of the first patches. This is the second one. It is a triangle to saw to square. So that's what this decal on the front in digital means, right? And the timbre knob is what will modulate the waveform between the waves. There's our square. Saw, triangle. Okay, so oscillators at their most basic form, they produce waveforms, right? And that's where we start to make our sound. Now, the difference in the three waveforms that I'm showing you, sine wave is the fourth one, right? But the idea that when you're looking at an oscillator and you're saying to yourself, well, which one do I use? Which shape? If you don't want many harmonics, you use a triangle, which means you want something that sounds kind of like a flute. Now, in the definition of Wikipedia, they told us to take a voltage, and the 218 is the voltage that I'm going to use, right? It's a keyboard, right? And we're going to apply that to the pitch input. And what just happened was you could hear that the pitch changed. So when I touch a note, I get a pitch. Exponential control. So every volt, we get another octave, right? All right, really nice sounding oscillator. Triangle, right? Now we're gonna go to a saw, because triangles don't have much harmonics. Saw have the most harmonics. Okay. And what does that mean? Okay, well, if we want to hear the character of a filter, we want to use a saw wave, because a saw wave has the most harmonic content. So in the Buchla, we use something called a low-pass gate. That is simply a filter with a VCA built in, right? I stop the sound, and I'm going to give it a timer. And you can hear the character of the filter the best with the saw wave, right? If we go to the triangle, it's plump, it's nice, makes a nice drum. But I think if we were trying to listen to the character of the 292, right, now we're listening to the oscillator with the scope at the oscillator level. Let's switch it and see what this filter is actually doing. See how it rounds it off? So a filter will take any waveform and kind of round it off, right? So here we are, we're just experimenting a little bit with our low pass gate, right? And even that colors the sound, right? Because when I looked at that waveform here, it's not inverted. So that's weird, right? But the character of that's great. Now the square has odd order or even harmonics, right? Very classic kind of sound, right? Now these are our three most classic waveforms. So when we're thinking about oscillation in, let's say, the .com, or we're thinking of it in a normal oscillator, analog oscillator, we have basic shapes: triangle, saw, ramp, square, right? So what's so different about, let's say, a complex Buchla oscillator? Like, what makes that different than a standard VCO? And why do I like it, right? Now, if we look, we get a square wave output. That's our square. Sorry. Here's a sine. Sine waves are nice and soft. And then another trick is like random voltage. Like, what is the deal with another type of voltage? Right now we're just using the keyboard, but let's imagine we wanted something a little more playful. 266. This is just random voltage, and let's see what happens. So random voltage, sort of like R2D2, right? Okay, so not so different than a standard oscillator, right? But wait a second. In the Buchla world, we get this wave-shaped waveform, right? And let's say I take an oscillator and I run a keyboard into the pitch. Right? Now, this guy has something called a timbre wavefolder. So it goes from a sine to a bigger sine to 2 sine waves to maybe 3 or 4, and there's 5. So this is called wave folding, right? So the Buchla has this weird thing built into it that's called a wave folder, right? And that's common inside of this analog oscillator. So I feel like it's more what digital oscillators try to do. And this is why I really like the sound of the Buchla. Now, let's listen to this gated and used as like a drum or a percussive piece, right? So I'm going to give it that clock. It's a little bit low. Right. It's kind of cool, huh? Wave shaping, right? A lot like Surge, right? And Eurorack does it really well too. But it's not something that like Moog oscillators do, right? And this is what is the West Coast sound, right? All right, so you're learning now the difference between an East Coast oscillator, which we showed in the beginning, which were the 4 basic waveforms. And now you're looking at a West Coast oscillator that had a wave shaper. Now, there's another thing that's built into these West Coast oscillators, and this is more the point of what I wanted to show, is that there are 3 main ways that we could modulate at least this oscillator. We can modulate the timbre, how it wavefolds. We can modulate the pitch, which is the pitch of the oscillator. And we can modulate the amplitude, which is AM. So when we talk about pitch, we talk about the pitch, the main, like the keyboard control, right? So let's listen to that. And I'm going to use a louder oscillator for this. So there's pitch control. And this is considered frequency modulation, right? Right? And listen to what happens now. This is the magic in oscillators, right? This is the magic in the Buchla too, right? Pretty cool. Hey, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching the channel. If you like what's going on, hit that like button. If you want to subscribe to the channel, tell friends, you learn here. That's what we do. We look at synthesizers, we jam out, we talk about our process of creation, right? So when I make a drum sound, right, if I used just a oscillator sound, right, which is like a sine wave, kind of like we're tapping on a drum. But the moment we add FM, frequency modulation, it's even cooler, right? It's like you're tapping on a piece of glass or something, right? So that's FM, right? Frequency modulation. Okay, so now we're going to look at it's the timbre folder, right? So the harmonic content, adding, taking away. So when we add, we take away, right? And let's do this with a voltage. This is one of my favorite sounds in the world. Because when you're playing music, so weird, right? Kind of like something's drilling in an overtone, right? And then AM is amplitude modulation, like how high the waveform is. And I like this because you start getting these sideband, is what I would call it, of the wave you're feeding it. So that's a sine, that's a push sine, and then there's a square. See how the square appeared? So AM is really cool because it's the height of the waveform. Very unstable, right? Look how cool this is, right? Now, this whole time that oscillator has not been hard synced. So hard sync means that we want the two edges of the oscillators to communicate. And I'm going to turn it on hard sync. And notice how it's not flowing through anymore. It's kind of more controlled. I find it to be more stale, but still musically cool. Amplitude modulation, right? Okay, so we covered a lot of ground there. That was crazy, right? So we're talking about voltage controlled oscillators. What is the voltage we control? Well, we control the pitch, and in this instance we were controlling the timbre, the wave folding that's built into the oscillator, and we were controlling the amplitude at one point in time because that's also built into the 261E and the 25S and the 259 if you've ever played with one of those. I've kind of shrunk down to more space-saving oscillators. I love the 259, but these are so similar, right? And now let's get into what wavetables do. Okay, so a wavetable oscillator is quite different in the sense that, you know, we only had so many choices here. I mean, the choices were really fun. There was a lot of range. There was a lot of options. But a wavetable is more like a preset keyboard, like a preset synth, right? And I say that because at any moment in time, we can be in the saw oscillator, right? And then you could say, hey, for the next song, I need a triangle, right? So at the turn of a button, you can just switch waveforms, right? So again, I need something different. I need something different. So this guy just keeps like updating, right? Now in braids, I believe there are 37 or 38 algorithms, right? This is not to cover braids and go in depth. But what I'm going to show you are 3 or 4 of my favorite and the reasons why, okay? They have a fold one. I totally believe it's a clone off the timbre folding. And when you watch it, It's just a very controlled version of the way the Buchla fold sounds, right? So I like it because of the stability. And what happens when we modulate that as we play it with a vibrato is the word. So a little bit of vibrato would be an LFO into the timbre folding. Now that's extreme, so when I said a little bit, maybe only go 2 or 3 harmonic folds, right? So there's one, right? So when you're at the core of your oscillator, what you learn is that the wavetables can seem to fluctuate and kind of undulate in a very interesting way. And I believe a lot of that comes from Don Buchla's design, right? From wave folding, right? Because it's just like wave folding right here. Now, if I go to the next, it's like a comb filter. I'm not going to go in depth with that. But I want to kind of point out this one. This is hard sync. And they said phase in the Wikipedia patch. Did you see that kink in the square there? That's the phase of another square. So it's phasing 2 square waves. And I wanted to bring that up because that's what the Wikipedia article said waveforms do. They create phase. Phase is the onset of each oscillator and when the onset of another oscillator happens. And a word you may have heard in the music studio is phase cancellation. All right, so I want to demystify something for you guys at home that hopefully might help you make better music. And the main reason I use single oscillators a lot of times instead of stacking 2 or stacking 3 or stacking 4 is because they phase cancel each other out. They make the sound actually weaker. All right, so when I make sounds, a lot of times I use a single oscillator because it seems to just be less phasey and keep everything more in tune, right? When you start to introduce a second oscillator, you get some pretty wild results. Now, I'm going to uncover one big thing that everyone does, even us inside the For You world, but the Moog itself, from what I understand, subtractive. It reduces harmonics. So this is a saw wave through a digital filter. And this is like the most classic synthesizer sound that anybody does. So if you're new to oscillators and you have no idea what you're doing and you want to have fun and all you have is like a random voltage and a filter, the trick is not to use the random voltage on the pitch. Right? Why? Because it's just like robot, you know? And that's not good to play like a guitar with. But if I had a way to take a quantized pitch and make something interesting, I would just modulate the filter. Because the oscillator keeps its remaining pitch where so that random voltage is modulating a filter, not the pitch. And it's a more and another place that's a great idea to put random voltage is pulse width modulation, right? Because the pulse width, the width of a square wave modulated randomly would be really neat as well. So if you were new to synths and you're always wondering how come some people's patches just sound so good, it's a lot of times they apply random voltage in places that don't ruin the patch. And in an oscillator, I don't mean to say ruin, but what do you do if this is out of key and you're like, well, I can't use my random generator because it just throws my patch into the garbage, right? But if you put it somewhere subtle, kind of hear it now. It's like the resonance spacing now, you know. So remember, random voltage is your friend if you know where to put it in the oscillator world, right? All right, so I went over that you want to use saw waves through filters all the time. It's the smartest way to listen to a filter. If we were going to do that, this is not a lesson on filters, so we're going to go past that. But I want to show another oscillator of interest of mine, and this is the FM1 built into braids. And this is a clone, to me, of the way a 259, 261E cross-modulate each other. Because right now, just like the most basic sine wave, right? But frequency modulation is introducing a second one, and then there's a pitch of the second one, right? Why do we use this? Because it makes extremely interesting drums. Listen how cool that sounds. So FM is like this magic. It sounds like you're tapping on something. So in the analog world, how do we do that? Like, right? Okay, so how do we make that with two analog oscillators? You're like one oscillator, sine wave, right? Out. You play with the pitch, excuse me, right? All right, so there's our oscillator. There's a sine wave. And then if I take another oscillator and modulate that one, like the frequency of it, right? Let's see what happens. We get back that glassy, awesome overtone. So maybe for you today to practice at home is take a couple of your oscillators and run them into each other and listen to the way the FM sounds, right? Because some are going to produce more interesting, like what if we did a square wave? You can see the squares going through it now, right? And then if I did a sine wave, it's like sines going through it, right? And that's glassier, kind of a different tone, right? So I would encourage you to play with frequency modulation. That's like the most interesting to me, the most interesting thing, right? All right, so we talked about voltage control oscillators in depth today. That was the point, right? I was covering some stuff that was on Wikipedia, right? And I talked about the different groups of waveforms. If you want to talk about the way that we're controlling it, we're using a keyboard, and that's an exponential converter, right? And basically, in synthesizers, we use these as the main tone generator, right? So that's kind of the big story today, right? I love how donkey that sounds, right? Glassy. Oh, it's magic, right? All right, so we covered FM, and then I want to look at one other one, and this is true wavetable synthesis, right? And it is by far the most interesting. And if I did not mention Paul Schreiber's name right now, I would probably be doing a disservice to the synthesizer community. So right now, if anybody knows anything about Eurorack and MOTM.com and all that stuff, Paul Schreiber recently passed away, so moment of silence for Paul, man. He was a really good dude. He's someone that I think really embodied what these wavetables do. And I think he's someone who pushed that envelope because any synthesis technology oscillator will prove that to you. And I believe Braids has some inspiration from Paul Schreiber as well. And when I say that, a wavetable oscillator is a little different because of the word arbitrary function, right? And that means the designer, somebody like Paul, someone like Amelia, you know, the person that designed all the braids and everything like that, you know, this whole idea that the designer makes arbitrary function choices. So a table itself is like it looks up different shapes, and this lookup table will look like a morphing oscillator. And I think the most important one to talk about, since I said Paul Schreiber, is the morphing terrarium, right? And I remember the first time I heard the morphing terrarium, I was blown away. It was the most interesting sound I'd ever heard in a module. And I know everybody's heard Massive or Vital's the one I really like. There's another one that's Serum. These are all wavetables, right? And the idea that they morph between a very interesting sound, right? And when we do this with a voltage, like an LFO, right? It's very cool. We do it slow and methodical. You hear these. This moving, it's almost like it's talking, right? Now there's other tables inside of Braids. That's another one. This is another set. So there's maybe like 32 tables in each group, right? And that's what they do, they morph. So this is where you get some very interesting, if you make ambient music, if you need to make cinematic soundtrack stuff, the development you get out of wavetables is super interesting, right? And these are voltage controlled oscillators that are digital, that have arbitrary functions. Very talky, right? Some are very brash, like noisy. Some are more like smooth, right? Okay, the last noise source or source for sound I'm going to mention is white noise, right? And someone would say, well, why am I going to mention noise as a source? Because it's something that we can make sound from, right? A lot of drums, hi-hats come from noises, like noise oscillators, you may hear that word. Noise is no more than white noise, right? Just psh. Kind of like static on the radio. I find it to be extremely usable as a sound source, and if I didn't mention it today with VCO, I'd probably be doing a disservice, right? But a lot of us make hi-hats with white noise, you know. It's very quiet. So sorry, let's see. Yeah, hear it. And it's every frequency. Noise is every single frequency, right? All at once. And that's white noise, right? So I think that was a pretty good cover of what oscillators are. I just wanted to discuss, it is the very first place sound starts in the modular. So we talked about sound sources today. A sample could be that placeholder as well. I did not cover that, but I covered a couple basic oscillators, and then I covered what complex oscillators do, and I covered what digital wavetables. VCO, the word is voltage controlled. That means I can plug in a voltage like a keyboard and control it, you know. So if we were like, there's our control, the pitch, right? We also talked about FM, which is running another oscillator into it. And if you like noise music, here we go. Or if you make drums, right? But I hope today was maybe some insight on what we do with synthesizers, right? So voltage controlled oscillator, if you need to look it up, go to the wiki page. If you need to do more studying, I recommend a software called VCV Rack. It's free, it doesn't cost any money. So get into VCV Rack. If you need more, you can always make comments, you can always email me. Let me know if there's any questions you have about oscillators. And it is April 30th. Today's discussion was synthesizers, VCOs. My name's Joseph. Thanks for tuning in. And hopefully you have a little bit firmer of a grasp of what we do with oscillators. I used a keyboard to control the pitch. Hopefully that was super obvious this whole time. And then the voltage that I was using to stop the sound was a VCA and an envelope generator. And it was just getting clocked off a square wave timer. So that whole patch was as basic as I could make it the whole time. And if it was a little boring, I'm sorry. But again, it was for education purposes, so I hope everybody got a little bit of understanding out of what these oscillators do. I think my system is built around 6 oscillators. There's 2 digital, 4 analog. Yeah, and that's kind of the heart of the system, what makes all your sound. The white noise generators on the other side, and then a sequencer and a keyboard is how I control all of those pitches. So this is the control row, the row at the bottom, and I consider this the processor row because this is the row that takes the sound and processes it, like filters and like frequency shifters and ring modulators and VCAs, and envelope generators are modifiers with all the modulation being like this side, you know what I mean? So the system's designed very specifically, but we'll get more into filters next on the next talk, and I hope everybody's having a great day. Yeah, enjoy it. Have a good one.